In part two of competitive labor markets, we're going to look at equilibrium. Labor market equilibrium occurs where the quantity demanded and supplied of labor are equal. There's no shortage of labor. Firms want to hire more workers than are available at the current wage, so that's what we mean by a shortage, where firms are having a hard time filling vacant positions. And a surplus, there's a situation where more workers want to get a job than firms want to hire at the current wage in the marketplace. So in equilibrium, it's characterized by harmony between the employers and employees. There is no shortage of labor. There is no surplus of labor. With a shortage of labor, or sometimes called excess demand, firms will offer higher wages to attract more workers, and that will help eliminate the shortage. At the same time, when there's a shortage of labor, workers will have lots of options for jobs, so workers will have lots of options for jobs so they can demand higher wages. If there is a surplus of labor, or sometimes called excess supply of labor, workers are willing to work for less to secure a job. It's very difficult for workers to find a job. There are more workers available than job openings, so workers may try to make themselves more competitive by offering to work at a lower wage. At the same time, firms will have lots of workers to choose from, so they can offer lower wages. So here we have the downward sloping labor demand curve representing the marginal value of labor, and here we have the upward sloping labor supply curve representing the marginal cost of labor. Equilibrium occurs where the quantity demanded of labor equals the quantity supplied of labor, and that occurs at 3 million nurses. Only at 3 million nurses does the quantity of labor demanded equal the quantity of labor supplied. And that occurs at the equilibrium wage here of $1,200. If the wage was something other than $1,200, there would be an imbalance in the labor market, either a shortage or surplus. So for example, at a wage below $1,200, let's take $600. At a wage of $600, the quantity of labor supplied would be 1 or 1 million. But firms would be willing to hire, walk this $600 all the way over to the labor demand curve, firms would be willing to hire 4 million workers. So there would be a shortage. Firms want to hire more workers than is available at a wage of $600. And as I just stated in the previous slide, that would cause wages to be bid up to eliminate the shortage. On the other hand, if the wage is above $1,200, there'd be a surplus of labor. There'd be more people looking for jobs than are jobs available. So at $1,800 at this relatively high wage, firms are only interested in hiring 2 million workers. But if we look at labor supply at this relatively high wage, a lot of people are willing to work at that relatively high wage. So at $1,800, if we bring this across to the labor supply and come down, it looks like there'd be 5 million nurses willing to work at $1,800 per week. So there'd be a surplus here of 5 minus 2, or 3 million nurses. Okay, let's move on. I want to talk about equilibrium. In equilibrium, all gains from trade have been made or maximized. All workers whose marginal value of labor, that is the worth to the firm, exceeds their marginal cost of working are hired. So anywhere that the labor demand curve is above the labor supply curve, like at this second or 2 millionth nurse, these workers will be hired. Why? Because the benefits outweigh the cost. So this is in a certain sense kind of benefit cost analysis. What is the benefit of hiring the second worker? Well, to the firm, it's $1,800. That's how much our revenues would go up by hiring the second worker, the marginal value of labor. But what about the cost side? Well, the marginal cost, the opportunity sacrificed by working here as a nurse, it's going to be $900. So all workers whose marginal value of labor, that is their worth to the firm in terms of increased revenue, exceeds their marginal cost of working, these workers will be hired. So for the second worker, the second nurse increases firm revenues by $1,800, okay, just given by the height of the demand curve, at a cost to the worker. So the marginal cost of working here, take this 2, plug it in the supply curve, come across, that's $900. That's where this $900 is coming from. So society's overall net benefit from hiring the second worker is positive. The benefit of $1,800 more than overcomes the marginal cost of working of $900. So overall, the net benefit of hiring the second worker is $900, $1,800 minus the marginal cost of working. In equilibrium, there are no workers who are hired in which the marginal cost of working to the worker exceeds the marginal value of labor to the firm. So, for example, this fourth worker will not be hired in a competitive labor market. The fourth nurse increases firm revenue, given by the height of the demand curve, by $600. At a cost to the worker, plug this 4 into the labor supply curve, would come across, and that would be $1,500. So it doesn't make sense from society's overall point of view to be hiring a worker that'll generate $600 of benefit at a cost to the worker of $1,500. So if you were to actually hire this worker, the society would overall be poorer by the difference, or $900, $1,500 minus $600. In equilibrium, workers are earning their marginal value of labor. So in equilibrium, 3 million workers are being hired at a wage of $1,200. Notice this wage, $1,200, equals the marginal value of labor. So since all workers are the same, workers are earning the marginal value of their labor in equilibrium. So we can say that workers are neither over nor underpaid. There are no exploited workers, in other words, in competitive labor markets. They're paid what they're worth. They're paid the value of their marginal product. And we can think of this, or this sometimes is referred to as marginal productivity theory of distribution. In equilibrium, the workers in equilibrium have the lowest marginal cost of labor. So notice here in equilibrium, the workers that are being hired, okay, on this first half of the labor supply curve, these are the workers in the labor market that have the lowest marginal cost of working. We're not hiring any of these workers up here that have a very high marginal cost of working. So this is a nice feature. Who are the workers that are working in a competitive labor market? It's going to be those workers that can provide their services at the lowest marginal cost of labor. Now, what about the firm side? The firms are hiring all the workers in equilibrium. The firms hiring all the workers in equilibrium are the ones that place the highest value on the workers. So up here, high in the demand curve, where the value of the marginal product here, the value of labor, is quite high, these are going to be the firms that are doing all the hiring. These firms down here that place a low value on labor, they're priced out of the labor market. They're not using the scarce resource. So that is a nice feature, again, of competitive labor markets, is that workers flow to their highest valued use. Employers that place a low value on workers cannot bid these workers away from their highest valued use. So these workers will only go to firms that place a high value on them, because these are the firms that can offer the highest wages. Let's talk briefly about changes in equilibrium. So this graph here on the left, I'm showing the effects of an increase in labor demand. In the previous video lecture, I talked about things that could cause an increase in labor demand. What we notice here is that the equilibrium shifts from E subscript 0 to E subscript 1. What's new about this equilibrium is that workers are being paid now a higher wage and more workers are being employed. So when labor demand increases, wages and employment expands in the labor market. The reverse would hold true if labor demand decreased. And this graph on the right here, we're showing an increase in labor supply. Maybe wages in other occupations fell, or there's an increase in the population. Whatever the case may be, we see the result here on equilibrium as the equilibrium wage falls. But once again, there are more people employed in the labor market. The equilibrium number of nurses employed increases. If labor supply decreases from a pandemic or Black Plague, for example, wages would be higher, but fewer workers would be employed. The equilibrium employment level would fall. So, speaking of the Black Death here, 1347 roughly killed 17 to 40% of the English population. This had a dramatic effect of reducing labor supply and raising wages by 50 to 100%. That's what our model would predict. Labor supply decreases, our new equilibrium wage would be higher, and fewer people would be employed. In 1987, Israel closed the border to Palestinians who worked in Israel. This decreased labor in Israel, and once again, wages went up. The high-tech bust. There was a decrease in labor demand as firms cut over 1 million high-tech jobs in 2001 and 2002, putting downward pressure on wages and compensation. Another case study, the Trans-Alaska oil pipeline. Oil companies hired lots of workers to produce a 768-mile oil pipeline in Alaska. This increased monthly earnings by over 50% during the period of construction. Once construction ended, the demand for these construction workers fell, and wages went back to their pre-pipeline levels. Okay, that's it.